we worked on it is talking about what does hope feel like. We talked about what is the wind? How do you know when the wind's around you? What's the purpose of the wind? Well, how is hope the same way? How do you know when you have hope? And they all could describe what that feels like. And then talking a little bit about, okay, well, how do you feel when someone gives you hope? And how can you provide hope to someone else? Kind of giving them, this is what you can do. There's many ways you could provide hope to someone and make them feel better about their situation. And in that way, it felt a little less about giving up privilege and power. It was, we're all in this together. And we all deserve the right to be happy.
Sure, and I just wanted to answer Lindsay's question or respond to it a little bit. She was asking about, in the United States, there's a lot of growing awareness around campus sexual assault. The White House has gotten behind a huge initiative about this. And Lindsay was saying, where does gender synchronization come into this? It's interesting. I mean, I'm doing some work right now with the Wellesley Centers for Women on sort of taking an assessment about what's happening on college campuses. And it's a bit of metaphor for the field, right? There's this sort of siloed work with, groups of men coming together doing some bystander work, and then there's a lot of work with women's groups on campus, and the administrations aren't coming together to coordinate any of it, and it really kind of, there's an opportunity to, think much more strategically and comprehensively about how you could have a much more coordinated and sustainable piece on campus, because what happens is usually for the men's work, those guys graduate, and maybe they eventually show up in Delhi, but it doesn't stay in the campuses where it's at. So.
Thank you. Let's take 3 more questions, and we'll move to this side of the room and start from the front, and then hopefully we'll have time to come back. Tim, you're giving up? You're not so sure about your question? You want to wait? Okay.
Oh, he's waiting for the mic.
Apart from anything else, Tim Shannon, a PhD student in Malawi, it gives me a chance to say how amazing the gender synchronized model is and how helpful I've found it, so thank you. I guess what I'm struggling with, and it speaks a little bit to Brian's question, is, so I'm speaking to men in Malawi, a setting quite similar to your setting, Morgan, about their health needs and their challenges, and there's a lot of vulnerabilities that we know that men themselves face, whether it's around their sexually reproductive health, whether it's around other non-communicable diseases and violence. And so I guess my broader question is, in your experience of implementation, is there a space in this to kind of really speak to the significant vulnerabilities that men themselves have in their own right? And we know the global data on this, both in terms of health but also violence, and how is there a space for us to talk about that within an understanding of the fact that we need to kind of work together? And then I guess my conceptual question was just, I've sometimes seen people present gender transformative kind of norms and gender synchronization almost as kind of two opposites. Things. It's kind of, this is the gender transformative framework, and this is another framework on gender synchronization. And of course, gender synchronization is clearly a central part of being gender transformative, but I guess it was just a plea if there was any nice kind of framework you have on really thinking through, because the gender transformative norms framework has been a kind of central plank of our work, but I think the gender synchronized piece has really helped to kind of unpack particular relational aspect, but I think sometimes maybe there hasn't been as much of an understanding of those interconnections, in my experience, at least in the work in sub-Saharan Africa. So I guess it's more of a plea, personally, than anything else.
Thank you. Let's move back and take
leaders. And just thinking, like the religious leaders, most of them are men. Correct me if I'm wrong, and they are the most influential people in the community, even to the community leaders. They can really they are the most powerful person and influential people. So with our experience in Nepal, when we started this alliance, we involved them. And I remember in one of the workshops, like a Muslim Mohalla teacher who was there for 2 days. He didn't speak for 2 days, but on the closing day, he said that he didn't realize like how much, he was almost like 70 years old, Mohalla, very senior religious leader. And he said that he didn't realize what kind of crime he was performing throughout his life by, performing child marriage. And he committed himself there in front of everybody that, I will not do this, and I'll make sure that in my community, even other religious leaders will not do like that. So similarly, we have so many, cultural practices that's very harmful to women in Hindu religion. They said, but we reviewed all the religions also that time. We involved all the faith-based leaders. It is not only one religion. And they said that in no religion it says that you should, like beat women or harm to women. But we still have, being a Hindu, there are a lot of harmful practices in our, culture. So all the religious leaders from there also, they said that, they will preach against those cultural practices in their regular preaching also. So it's just a kind of experience sharing and a food for thought also, for all of us who are working through this alliance. I think we should really capitalize those group of people, the religious leaders. Thank you.
Thank you. Right behind you. Yeah, we can take Rachel
Hi, I
also.
have a very specific question for Brad, for your voices component of your program. How did you get the fathers in? And the context in which I'm asking this question is that I work with the Center for Catalyzing Change. It's an organization working in the state of Bihar, which scores very low on social and health, and on all indicators. And we're trying to engage with husbands on domestic violence, and we've also tried to engage with fathers in a similar intervention. So my question to you is, you've worked in 2 countries, and so what were your strategies to get the fathers interested and come in for your sessions?
Great. And one more, Rachel.
I just have some comments. I don't have any questions. I'm just trying to think about the Indian situation where teenage boys and teenagers don't have much access to reproductive health. A lot of programs have been started, but still, that's the reason there's still a stigma around unmarried girls. So a lot of unwanted pregnancies end up being unsafe abortion. And I wish there'd be more programs to address that. And also, if you look at the statistics, Indian statistics, 57% of the women get married before the age of 18. And there are a lot of pressure among even married couples to conceive the first child as soon as they get married. So we need more programs to address this. And also, if you see the newspaper today, there's 98% of the sterilizations happen among women. And there need to be more programs which popularize sterilization among men. So this is just my comment.
Great.
To do with your,
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Rachel?
I want to thank you very much for the panel. I think it's been incredibly important that we've had this session on gender synchronization, and thank you, Meg, for coming up with the phrase.
And Andrew.
I do think that there is a big danger in othering women within the context of Men Engage, and with interventions that increasingly recognizing they have to work with women, but then are bringing them in as an afterthought, and they're still, have working with men in the title rather than a sort of gender embracing or gender neutral title. And I think that it's very important that we actually look at this critically. So that's a comment. But my question is for Morgan. I might have missed it, but I didn't hear you talk about working directly on violence as an issue. And PNG is a really unusual setting because it is so phenomenally violent, and all of the people who you will have been working with, apart from the women experiencing intimate partner violence, will have experienced other forms of victimization, or even if it's witnessing or participating in things like sorcery-related violence, which are very, very common. I mean, the spectrum of violence is enormous. And I'm just wondering, or I'd like to hear what you've got to say about the extent to which violence was embraced sort of, or addressed sort of head-on within your intervention. And also whether you did any work around people's victimization history and vulnerability from violence and feelings about having been involved in violence as part of your intervention.
Okay, great. Let's start with Morgan and then move back down this way.
Okay, thank you. You're absolutely right. To respond, I think that in the future we're going to be trying to do more work that's specifically addressing gender-based violence. I think that in the work that we've done through this project, we've been working on violence as it's identified by the community as a problem. So the men are identifying violence against other men, violence that they experience against or from at the hands of their fathers and at the hands of their peer groups. But at the same time, women are also able to identify that as an issue, and it comes out as a major issue on its own from the community's own input into what we're doing, and they come up with the action plans against that. So sometimes they will do awareness campaigns in their communities. And we also had a really interesting conversation the other night with another colleague or peer of mine from Papua New Guinea who was talking about kind of the fears around some of the practices. So a lot of the fears around women is that if you are near women's bodily fluids in any way, that it weakens you, and so then you become a victim of violence. And so it's very, very complex. It's something that we deal with as it comes up in the communities, and something we'd like to be dealing with more. And I think I've only been in this position for about 4 months, and something that's been a major question for me and that I'd like to try to answer going forward is also your same question about the histories of violence that people have experienced and how that is playing out into the future, because it is not just violence against women. That's how you raise your children, that's how you interact with your friends, that's what your father does, it's all of these things. So, yep. Thank you, good question.
Okay, so the fathers, oh, there you are. I think Coca-Cola helps getting them in. Yeah, a little drink. Maybe beer might help, but that's not the way we're going to go. To be honest, we just developed voices this year, so we're finalizing the videos, and we're about to roll that out next year, so we'll have a lot of experience on how to get them in. But I think, drawing on my past experiences and working in many countries, I think what we're going to do, following our influence principles, these are smaller groups. These are all the children are in a child club. They're in very tight-knit communities. So I think choosing the parent that hosts the meeting is going to be quite influential in getting everyone else to come, and having maybe the father of that couple send out that invitation through the men, I think is also going to be really helpful to getting them in. Whether or not they come the second reunion is going to be based on how well they feel they're being spoken to through the videos. So we have a lot to learn. And then there was the comments on child marriage. We didn't put our package together as a ending child marriage campaign, but I think it's there. And Meg and I have talked about this. I actually think this type of package fits really well within context. We developed it first in Nepal, where there's very high early marriage. And we chose, instead of that behavior on promises being not marrying girls off, we chose the proxy of keeping girls in school. There's many reasons why, but that was our proxy to not marrying girls off towards child marriage. But I don't think this alone would end that community practice.
There was also one question about
Gender vulnerabilities. Well, thanks. I'm going to try to respond to a bit of what both Tim and Rachel asked. Tim was asking, first about, what's the distinction between gender transformative work and gender synchronized work. And the way I see it is I see that, this concept of looking at gender synchronization is simply a critical reflection of looking at gender transformative approaches and really looking for where are those opportunities and reflecting on it about better ways to engage men and women, better ways to recognize that gender is relational and provide opportunities for that. So I don't see them as mutually exclusive in any way. I think they're inextricably linked. But I also wanted to say that, and then Tim's question then about where does that leave just the men's work? There's specific vulnerabilities for men, and we still need to address those. And I would agree with that. I don't think that in this work we're suggesting that everything has to kind of immediately become gender synchronized and melded together. I think that part of what Meg showed in that framework was that, we come from different perspectives, and some programmings have very distinct looks at what are men's gender vulnerabilities, and that's great. And women's programs oftentimes come from that perspective of what are those vulnerabilities. And I think it's a simple question of, okay, so what is the relational aspect of that? In doing that work around men and seeking health care and health-seeking behaviors, is there a role that women are playing in those gendered notions of health-seeking behavior for men? What does that environment look like? How are women contributing to that clinic environment that's not welcoming to men? I think it's just trying to be reflective around those things. And I think that maybe the common ground of all of that is that ultimately that work with men or that work with women would be borne out in a gendered perspective that I think would come from feminism, that would be based in human rights and be based on social change. And I think that's the kind of commonality that we can all walk from.
I wanted to respond to the person at the back who raised the issue of the very, very large proportion among people who are sterilized, who are women, which I don't know if you saw, then steam started coming up from my ears. This issue, I think, is it's a number which captures the fact of how we have not dealt with sexuality explicitly, but how we implicitly have privileged some ideas about male sexuality and women's reproductive role. So, go, sister, and no great solution to that immediately, but I think it's such an important issue. Rachel, thank you so much for saying this comment on the danger of othering women in the context of Men Engage. It gives me an opportunity to rant about something else, which is that there's something about the fact that about the polarity of thinking about two sexes and the gender roles that makes us crazy, or that makes us think in very strange ways. And the two examples that come to me, and this is a little bit incoherent, but I think that you'll understand. The first one that comes to mind is, can you imagine, because we are in some cases still making the case that, yes, you're working with women, but you should pay attention to men, or you're working with men and you should pay attention to women. Can you imagine, for example, the civil rights movement in the United States, in which white people did not participate, or African Americans did not participate? It's so bizarre. But somehow that's naturalized in the context of work on gender. So that's one expression of our craziness. And the second is, I think that, and maybe it's a bit of a...
White engage, right?
A white engage. No, that's exactly. The other point that I wanted to relate to that is how, and I'm surprised that nobody here, called us on this, but I think that one of the dangers with the kind of shallow reading on the gender synchronization concept is that it looks like it implies heteronormativity. It's like, couples, a man and a woman, and I think that our growing awareness, appreciation, skill, understanding gender and sexual diversity is really important, because it just blurs things more, and it will make us more nuanced and more capable for thinking about all of these things.
Okay, I think we may have time for maybe 2 more questions. Hands up. Wow, we've exhausted, so I'll ask my question. My question was, one question here. Yes. Go ahead. That's right.
Thanks. Thank you very much. My name is Luis Lineo, and I'm with Men for Gender Equality still, but we'll see. I am also a sexuality educator from Sweden, by the way. So my question, you actually started answering that question, but I still want to ask you that for the practitioners that you are, because that's the way I work too. And it's about heteronormativity, how you address that and the challenge with that, and also going beyond the gender binary, because often it's a challenge, and so how we start our talk, it kind of sets the mind, so how we perceive and thinking. So that's very important. That's why that's important too, of course. So that's, okay, maybe not a real question like that, but I just want to hear it from you practitioners about that. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Meg just made, and the additional comment now. And I wanted to just ask, so I'm based in Thailand, and there were some youth perception studies that UN Women did recently, and they asked young people how many genders there were in Thailand, and not one person answered 2. The average was 7, and it went up to 12. And so we have a very, at least in the Asia-Pacific region, we have a very complex understanding of gender. And I wanted to ask particularly about Nepal, where you actually have third sex recognition, whether you've brought in anything in particular into the Choices curriculum.
I don't always approach things with this gender, I approach it from a behavior change point of view. So we go in saying, what are the behaviors we're trying to change? And then what are the emotional drivers of those behaviors? And how do you use influence principles to get people to move towards that? So I probably would approach it differently if that came up as something. When working with 10 to 14-year-olds, I don't know how I would introduce that at that point, except for we have a whole session on a journey of respect. And we pit, it's a bit manipulative in a way, that's part of marketing, but we pit 2 types of men against each other. Which one do you respect more? Pit 2 women, which one do you respect more? The one, do you respect a boy who helps clean up after he eats, or one who says it's not my role? And we get them to talk about it. And I could see us putting aspects of tolerance and respect into that journey of respect if we had to. But if you read this version of it, it's not going to show up.
I think it's such a great question, and it's such a hard question to grapple with, because we're trying to move the needle and then reinforcing the needle, as I kind of mentioned before, we have these key messages that I mentioned, the first one is I decide what being a man or a woman means to me, and that's moving the needle, but we're still working in the binary and saying that. Now, there can be a conversation about, from there, what that means, and that's really good. I worked with a consultant who sort of analyzed gender matters and made a lot of suggestions about how it could be more trans-friendly and more gender identity broad. But then there were so many disclaimers in doing that, and the kids are just kind of like, huh, what are you talking about? So there's that mix. There's a fine line that you have to go into, and I think it takes a really skilled educator. And I don't think I have the answers, but I think to ask the questions is the way forward, and to make the acknowledgement of the heteronormativity that's implied in some of the work, I think is the first step. And I think it's an important acknowledgement. And then, we continue to work together to try to figure it out.
I could give one quick example, and I think because you're a sexuality educator, we both started as health educators as well, and I think you use your intuition when timing is right. And I remember on doing individual counseling, it was really easy to bring that in. I was working in inner city Harlem in New York City, and I remember having a shift in my thinking, saying I am too heteronormative in how I do my questioning. So I tried it out for a week. Every boy that came in, instead of asking, do you have a girlfriend, I would start with, so tell me your boyfriend's name. It was interesting. But I used my intuition of, can I say this to this boy who's in front of me, and how will they react? And their reaction as a health educator, psychology, was a great way to start a discussion. So, it fits in some places and it doesn't always fit.
Great. So I am afraid our session has come to a close, but before I close, 3 things. One is that I really want to thank all of you for being such an engaged audience. I think we really teased out some great issues and questions for all of us to continue to work on. I really want to thank our panelists for giving excellent presentations and really thinking through all the issues as they came up very quickly. And third item is I do not want to fly back with these. So please pick them up on your way out. Okay? Thank you. Thanks.